Hi, I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
And we're the hosts of the Chasing Tomorrow podcast, where we bring you stories that delve into the science and spirit behind intriguing people doing extraordinary things. Welcome to the Chasing Tomorrow podcast, episode 31. Tonight we have a very special guest on, a really great friend of mine and a co-founder of Performance Tea, Marco Lam. Marco is one of those unique cats that sort of is inspiring in both what he's done and who he is as a person. I like to sort of make him the perfect example of East meets West. You know, he has an acupuncture background. He's an herbalist. He's lived in Boulder for a long time, also many other places. And his community that he's been helping for a long time, the entrepreneurs and high performance athletes in the Boulder community, of course, as well as anyone else who needs help. Marco is just a guy who likes to give of his time, and both his care and passion come through in everything that he does. So I've had the privilege of knowing him for 4 years. We're just thrilled to have you on the podcast, Marco, and look forward to spending the next hour with you.
Thank you, Joe. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so Marco, number one, I'm a big fan of your product. I'm a big user of Performance Tea for both getting ahead of and also, tackling, inflammation and recovery and on and so forth. But, I love creators. And you seem like you're a creator. I mean, you've created two companies, Performance Tea and Free Health. So tell me something a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? What brought you into the world that you're living now?
Well, I think one of the things is both my parents are first generation immigrants. My dad is from Shanghai, China, and my mom's from Tübingen, Germany. And I think from being raised in that multicultural household, I just see the world a little differently. And looking at how cultures come together, I've always had a fascination and a love for the natural world. And I've always been a plant person. I've always been able to identify the plants and the ecologies that I travel through. And, at first I was interested in using them for sustenance, like what plants are edible, what berries are edible. And it eventually branched out into medicinal plants. And I've had a lifelong love affair with the plant world. And as a Chinese medicine practitioner, they're sort of the most complex of herbalists in a way. Like they use polypharmacy, so they use maybe 12 to 15 herbs in a formula and are using thousands of years of clinical studies to say, how are these herbal formulas used and how are these herb combinations used? And for me, that level of plant knowledge is just fascinating to me. And I'm constantly studying with plant medicine teachers from all over the planet and how plants and humans work together to create a better world.
Yeah, I like that, Marco. So it's interesting because the context within which we live always sort of affects both what we do and how we think. And so you had that interesting context of two immigrant parents and a culture, if we were in China, around the topic of plants and herbs is very different than American culture. We tend not to move in the direction that you're sort of informed on. And so, but there is such benefit that can come from this. How through your journey have you taken sort of your love of the plant world and the positive effect it can have on someone's life and worked with, the Western society that doesn't have that level of knowledge and sort of appreciation? What have you done and how has that evolved? And has it been frustrating along the way or exciting? How's it been?
I mean, mostly I think it's been an honor. usually people come to my clinic, and we have 24 practitioners at our clinic. Only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of which are Chinese medicine practitioners and all of them are herbalists to some degree, though some practitioners are more kinesthetic, body focused, and some are usually the more internal medicine practitioners are the ones who are more herbally focused. And most of my patients come in because something is wrong. Something is organically wrong. Maybe it's with their sleep, maybe it's with their mental health, maybe it's with their digestion, maybe it's with chronic pain, maybe it's with something not functioning right in their body. And we start a conversation, a dialogue about how to evolve the human potential. And a lot of times plants are a huge component of that, because the plants have intelligence and wisdom and a long track record of working with the human body in ways that are both efficacious and illuminating. So I think there's for me, what stands out is just like almost like being an ambassador between the plant world and the human world.
And it's a complex picture, isn't it, Marco? Where I'm a practicing massage therapist up here in Canada, and it's a complex picture of when it comes to human performance and health, because there's a lot that goes in, there's a lot that's around, and then of course there's a mental state and how people are surviving in this world, and thriving in this world at this very same time. I mean, is there a specific patient that you really prefer working with? Is it the athlete? Is it the aging patient? Is it the youth? Do you prefer working with one versus the others?
To be honest, the patients I like to work with are the ones I've worked with the longest, and usually they're the ones who came from a place of illness or sickness to like really radiant health. But then from a place of radiant health, like they up level to a whole nother level of sort of fulfilling purpose. And they're chasing their tomorrow, so to speak, or maybe chasing their today. Like it's that we find that this person through their healing crisis finds out they have capacities, have potentials that they didn't tap before. And then once they start tapping, like the millstone's already starting to move. And I like it when that millstone has momentum and you're just sort of fine tuning and helping people, fine tune to what their next potential is, or just fulfilling existing potentials to a higher degree.
That's pretty cool. I think if maybe, of course, not specific people, but dive in a little bit on this, like that breakthrough moment. People come to you with hope, right? They're like, oh my God, something's wrong. Can you help me?
But we're not. Sometimes people are just at the end of their rope. They're like, I tried everything. I've tried chiropractic. I've tried pharmaceuticals. I've had 2 surgeries and things are still not working. And can you help?
And then, so that breakthrough moment, people sometimes don't believe it's there, right? And then they get there. What is it, how can we help each other a little more around that? Like what are some of the things other than sort of the treatments, of course you do, but that you can suggest to listeners about, how to think about because you're working on really what we call like a stored potential, right? I mean, it's all in there. You're getting it back out again.
Well, clinically, I use a tool, a map in my head a lot, because we all have biases and we all tend to be strong and weak in different places. So a very simple bias of this would be an interior-exterior bias, right? So the exterior biases are all things that I can measure: my blood work, my lab work, what my diet is, what my supplements is. And honestly, sometimes I have patients come in, they bring me a whole folder full of lab work, blood work, parasite tests, and a box full of supplements. And they're like, I'm doing everything right. What am I doing wrong? And so a lot of times for them, the huge growth opportunities comes from not the exterior, the things we can measure, but the interior is like, what are we feeling, you know? And so sometimes for that particular patient, it may be like, oh, it might be time for you to join a men's group. It might be time for you to have a meditation practice. It might be time for you to go do some marital therapy. So sometimes like people who have that strong external bias, their biggest growth curve will be from exploring their interior.
Mm.
And the
Do you
flip
find
side
that
is,
sorry, Marco, do you find that that's a struggle at all? Because, you take something that's, exterior that you can definitely measure versus all the other, interior stuff that it's more difficult to measure. But yet, in my opinion, I think there's tremendous growth that can be had. But do you find that that's difficult to discuss with patients?
it really depends on the patients. And some of the patients who are really exterior oriented, like say you're a top level athlete, say you're a top level runner, and we can say like, hey, how about you do this one particular practice for 30 days and take a look at the external measurements afterwards. And so sometimes the interior will map over to the exterior. I think if you find the sort of right key to that lock, people should see shift relatively soon. And a lot of times the acupuncture points or the sort of fascial planes that are adhesed or not moving, will release. Like as a massage therapist, you can think about like someone who has tight trapezius and like erector spinae, and their muscles, their shoulders are almost touching their ears,
Mm-hmm.
and that's just a huge amount of waste. That tension wastes a huge amount of efficiency in movement, right?
Mm-hmm. No doubt.
And you can do body work or chiropractic every week, and for some people it just, their shoulders creep up, but then you're like, oh wait, maybe you have some anger and some rage in there, which is common in like really high level competitive athletes. Sometimes that that rage and anger is one of the things that fuels amazing performance if it's channeled right. But a lot of times at a certain level of evolution, that becomes like, it becomes the end of the road, where inflammation starts building up, and you can't just push your anger and rage out onto the pavement anymore. So
Well, I think this is, sorry, Marco, I think
go
this
ahead.
is a really important conversation because I think the vast majority of our listeners are on their path to mastery. I mean, what they want is they want to become better at their sport. And, that's why they're looking for a podcast like this. And, in my opinion, the top ultra runners in the world, the top performers in the world aren't necessarily the best athletes, but they're more balanced. They take a more balanced approach at things, and they're calm and they're relaxed when they need to be, and they're clear when they need to be as well too. Would you tend to agree when you take a look at some of your athletes in your office? It's there's more of a holistic approach where, okay, let's discuss some anger issues that we might have, or let's create more calm in our day-to-day life, and that might translate to better performances on the track.
Yeah, I think having sort of like a inner stillness to have a deeper well inside to draw from is huge. I think of like Phil Jackson coaching Michael Jordan in Zen meditation or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That interior sort of is a rich piece, and there's a lot of different places to explore that interior. The flip side of it is sometimes you have a patient who's all interior. They've been like, I've been going to therapy for years, I'm clear where my issues are, and like when I get angry, my shoulders get clenched up, and sometimes for them it's like, oh, what's your regular physical practice like? Let's do a diet log and an exercise log for the next 2 weeks, and just sort of track. Let's see how many things on the external that we can track. And even if you don't feel like doing it, still do it. So sometimes if we look at these just basic core biases, sometimes we can sort of look at the world differently through a different angle of health.
Yeah, this is sort of really, in a way, very, not just enlightening, but has a feeling of liberating, because what you're suggesting, both through your experience and your understanding, is that we can break through the issues that we have, that whether it is internal or external or some combination of both, with the right both encouragement, guidance, expertise, there isn't a reason why we can't get to a better place than we are today. I am sure that you have some really amazing success stories. Have you learned along the way some techniques to break through on the people who are sort of harder to break through on?
Yeah, but I would say, I guess it would denote that like some people are harder to break through on others. Like some people are like, probably the most challenging ones are people who are either have severe depression or have substance abuse or have genetic illnesses. Those would be like the three, like, really those are, in Chinese medicine we would say those are naughty conditions, not naughty as in good and bad, but naughty as in like a Gordian knot, where you have so many things tied together that it's hard to find which thread to pull on to loosen the knot.
Interesting. I like that metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think that those cases, a lot of times there's still huge amounts of human potential that are untapped in those beings.
This idea of pulling on the right string, huh? You could probably get pretty good at that over time. Let's go back a little bit to the role of these plants, because I do think it's not fully known and understood. Interestingly enough, right? We've heard, at least we'll keep talking North America kind of thing, a bit of Western, that there's superfoods that people heard about. Maybe if I eat broccoli or kale or avocado or blueberries, they're good for me. We don't sort of know how they're good for me, but there's been enough sort of public information about that. But you work on another side of the plant world, the mushroom and herbs and even roots and rhizomes and stuff that's in the ground that in and of itself doesn't look like it could be appealing, let alone do anything for us.
And some of it's not appealing. Some of it's, downright horrible tasting.
But it's a combination really of science and knowledge to really understand. And maybe talk for a second about how powerful, these plants can be, these herbs and roots and mushrooms. Like they're like as powerful as any other substance we could put in our body.
Sure. And, it's really, and some of them can be harmful, right? If taken inappropriately. So like just taking there's the most powerful herb, I want to take it. Sometimes if you take the wrong herb for the wrong person, it's not a good match, right?
Yeah. But, so do you try and educate people on them, or just suggest taking it? And what would we want to know about these different plants that you work with?
I mean, in Chinese medicine school, you'll learn in an herbology course, you might study 500 different herbs, and you might study several hundred different combinations of how to combine those herbs together. And that's just sort of like entry level, right? A lot of herbalists, a lot of practitioner acupuncturists are just like get totally blown out of the water going through acupuncture school and just say, I'm focusing on the physical and I'm not going to keep up my herbal knowledge. It's just too much headspace. But for the people who are really like passionate about the craft, about herbal medicine, like what herbs can do is huge. And it's just a question of what do you want them to do?
Yeah, so it's quite the craft. It's A couple of years ago, or probably about a year ago, seems like everybody in my friend group was watching this movie or this documentary on Netflix called Game Changers.
Yep.
And they just said, you know what, cut out meat and eat vegetables only, and your performance will bump up exponentially. But I really don't think it's that simple. When it comes to herbalists and combining this and that, and based upon my activity level is different than Joe's, and Joe's is different than yours, and everybody has different issues and different performance levels and different needs in their lives. So what you're saying is that the average person really should be seeing an herbalist on a day-to-day basis, because it really is that complicated. It's quite confusing for the average person.
Oh, probably depends on what culture. I mean, a lot of cultures still have herbal medicine as their primary medicine, and you just grow up knowing the herbs in your environment, right? And those herbs become sort of a bridge between sort of food and health in a way.
Yeah.
And it gets baked into a culture over time, and then it becomes sort of a acculturated value. I think as we sort of get dispossessed from our native ecologies, right? Most of us who are in North America, unless you're a Native American, and even if you are a Native American, you probably got shoved and pushed around a lot that you're not in your native habitat anymore. So a lot of this sort of internalized botanical culture has been lost. And really, I explained this to one of my students recently. There's a big difference between running through the woods and realizing you're surrounded by medicine and plants and plants you can eat. You suddenly become in relationship. You have a sense of home because you're like, oh, I'm surrounded by plants that can support me, surrounded by medicine, and being in a place where you don't have that relationship. And when you have that relationship, something shifts, and it shifts on a really subtle and deep level, and then you're just sort of more in relationship.
Yeah. So it sounds like a bit of it sounds beautiful, but it also sounds really convoluted and confusing. Well, what's a first step that the average person or the athlete should be taking, to take that first step in regards to taking herbs, getting on top of it? Is it going out and trying performance tea? Is it going in and going and seeing a practitioner that's local?
I think those are both awesome first steps. I think it really depends on your level of interest and what your passions are. I mean, my passion is obviously plant medicine, so for me it goes deep in many different directions. But let's sort of break it down, and because we want to make it simple and approachable in a way. Joe talked about earlier about superfoods, right? And one of my favorite superfoods is the dandelion. And most people can identify a dandelion because you have it in your yards. And a fair amount of people spray chemicals in their yards, which impacts their endocrine health particularly, which is a really bad idea. But if you don't spray chemicals in your yard and don't have lots of animals, pooping and peeing in your yard, the dandelions is probably one of the most nutritious foods there is in terms of nutrient density, especially the fresh greens in the spring. Potent anti-inflammatory, potent liver cleanser that helps get rid of accumulated toxins, particularly industrial toxins in your system. And you can sort of think about the dandelion. It's a happy survivor, so when you just have that relationship to this one happy survivor, like that plant has resilience. It's hard to kill. And 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 in some ways, like, those are qualities I want to be in relationship. I want to be resilient, and I want to be hard to kill, and I want to be happy. And when we look at basically how our body processes industrial chemicals, it mostly goes through our hepatic pathways, right? But so do our hormones. So a lot of times, by regulating, taking out some of those industrial toxins and regulating our hormones by cleaning out our hepatic pathways, we suddenly are healthier beings. So that's like a very simple plant that most people can relate to, that grows almost everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere that we would be,
I like that.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Even,
And the sad part about it is a lot of people think of it as a weed and want to get it out of their yard rather than think about, when I was growing up, my grandmother was from Italy. She lived with us, and, we would go like off the side of the road and pick the dandelions and make them into a salad. And then chicory was another similar kind of, these just grow in the wild. And she had a pretty strong connection. I always thought of the Italian food. We always said it tasted better. And then when you go to Italy, you realize that they just have very simple ingredients, but they care for them differently than we do. And they don't, excuse me, but poison them along the way, and makes a difference.
yeah, and that would be a good example of that sort of grandma picking the dandelions and the chicory. That would be some intact herbal knowledge, that would be, place-based herbal knowledge.
Yeah.
And that those chicories and dandelions didn't come here by accident. They were brought over by, early immigrants who are like, we need to bring our medicines with us. Like, if you think about like people coming across the Atlantic by ship and only can bring a very small amount of things, imagine that they chose to choose some of their valuable cargo space with these very things. These plant medicines were imported to some European grandma a long time ago, or young European of some ancestry, right?
Yeah. No, it's fun to think about that at that time. What did I know other than, that's what grandma does? And I think that there is a lot of that. If we're in the right community, we get this sort of tribal knowledge that is embedded. And, Marco, you, this past year, you don't have enough to do in your life. So you went off and started a farm, or collaborating on a farm in a permaculture environment, and maybe sort of extend a little bit into how that's part of your passion and mission here to bring really good food to people.
Well, I'm a permaculture teacher, and permaculture is a design science that teaches people an ethical way to get their needs provided while living on the earth. And it's, a lot of people think of it as organic farming, as chickens, as beekeeping, as having nice orchards, and like a lot of times permaculturists have these wild but heavily productive landscapes around where they live, and people associate that with permaculture. But really, permaculture is the exploration of what it means to be a healthy, ethical human being in relationship to the ecology you live in. And that's a passion of mine. And I've lived in Boulder for over 2 decades, practicing medicine at my clinic, and teaching permaculture there as well for over 2 decades. And I had an offer to come run one of the most beautiful permaculture farms in North America. We're on 700 acres in a alpine valley, and we have beautiful fruit orchards here. I have a 4-season greenhouse, which, even though there's 2 feet of snow on the ground right now, there's lemons and oranges and figs and all sorts of tropical plants and medicinal plants growing in there. So it's a little bit of magic, and it's a little bit of what is possible when we sort of work with nature rather than work against nature.
Yeah.
And so have you always been like a permaculturist at heart? I mean, even as a child and a young adult, did you, in comparison to a lot of the, your friends that you grew up with, did you always have that ache in your heart for, for more balance and non-destructive? Because I kind of see the North American lifestyles are quite destructive. So less destructive lifestyle.
I think I was an angry hoodlum, in all honesty, in my in my early years. I ran into a young man who came to see me, and he's like, "Oh, wait a second, I know you." And and I had never interacted with him, but I was a bit of a terror in my neighborhood growing up, at least according to him.
Really?
I never thought of myself that way, but he did, and it was sort of funny just to meet a patient who knew me
Oh,
from my
that's funny.
childhood, you know.
Yeah. When did that turn? Were there influences that maybe sparked a different idea, a different thought of a way of doing things?
I think some of the most I think I had a love of nature even back then, but for me it was playing around the quarries on the East Coast, riding BMX bikes, dirt bikes around in the woods, and canoeing and cross country skiing and exploring. But we were sort of at that suburban rural interface that got developed really quickly on the East Coast, which created a lot of. It was an interesting time because we were probably the first generation of kids where both parents were working. So suddenly we had this generation of sort of latchkey kids.
Yeah.
And so it was an interesting time. I think for me, I had a experience of just what is possible with botanical medicine with the Mapuche in southern Chile, and it was a really sort of life-changing experience, spending time with the indigenous culture that had a really beautiful medicine tradition and had such a deep connection with plants and with the ecology which they lived in.
So
Mhm.
you're, clearly on the sort of the high end of the spectrum of not just sort of care and attention to life and people and plants and the earth. How do you feel about where we are as a society, relative to whether it's climate change, industrial farming, concrete, and just a lack of sort of in touch with the earth? I mean, do you feel like we're stuck, retreating, advancing, hope for the future? Like, how does it sort of sit with you?
I'm weirdly optimistic, I think, in that regard. I think that both we're putting a lot of pressure on our ecology. I don't think anyone can deny that. But I think that the level of awareness that we're doing that is increasing
Mm-hmm.
exponentially faster than the amount of increased damage. We're getting increased awareness that we're having damage. And I look at my daughter's generation and the next generation after that, and they're more aware of issues of social justice and environmental repair than any other generation has been. So for me, I'm I don't know that I'm hopeful. I tend to think that just like illness and health, that it's not it's like sometimes people try to globalize illness or globalize health, and sometimes you'll have pockets where you have huge amounts of ill people, and sometimes you'll have pockets of where you have huge amounts of healthy people. So in some ways I think that the future is already here.
Mm.
um, it's just not evenly distributed. I think a philosopher once said, so there's places facing huge amounts of ecological and environmental devastation where life is already really difficult, you know? And then
Mm.
there's certain places that are almost Shangri-Las, that are moving things in a positive direction.
Certainly your farm, right? It's a Shangri-La for sure.
The farm definitely feels like that, but I think, mountain communities have their own pressures, of like what sustains a rural, community is a good question, and a question that we still haven't totally found the answer, but I think we're starting to ask better questions around it.
No, I had the pleasure of watching a documentary a couple of weeks ago. So the Lowell brothers have been doing this Real Rock Film Festival for years, and every year they'll produce a multi-segment climbing-oriented film. Well, this time, the first segment was focused on a gym in Memphis called Memphis Rocks, ROX, and it's in South Memphis, which is one of the toughest communities in our country, and it's predominantly, if not 99%, Black African American and very poor. And they set up a climbing gym there, and it's a community gym. It allows for people to come if you can't pay. And the story was just amazing because what they did was combination of one of the greatest mountaineers of all time, Conrad Anker, went to visit and then took 10 of them up to Montana to go ice climbing for 4 days. And the story was told beautifully, and it's a tearjerker for sure, because the transformation that these young kids get through is, and they hated the cold and the ice. But what I was thinking of, Marco, as I was listening to you, is that, you're talking about the mountains, and this is something they had never seen, right? They didn't understand it. And when they left, they appreciated it at a level that they were changed people after 4 days. And, for any of our listeners, if you want to make a donation to something this year, Memphis Rocks is an amazing, charity to give some to, because they're on it. They're on a real, and there's no punches pulled, and there's no sort of phoniness in the people who are in it, and it gave me this sort of like hope again about what sometimes we have to do, which is what you're doing, which is what I'd love to jump into, is a little bit of this, like, when you can lead from your position or from what Conrad actually did, or the guys who run Memphis Rocks, we can change people, like, to your optimism. We can get them feeling something different, because part of what's been our struggle is we haven't felt that, haven't seen that, don't understand it. I mean, I would imagine that that's one of the things you keep trying to do, right? Is to introduce more people, whether it's the farm, your practice, your backcountry skiing, bringing them out to touch this, right? I mean, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think in the biggest sense, there's an evolutionary current. We wouldn't be here without it, and we're evolving into more and more complex systems, and no one could have dreamed of 100 years ago. So there's obviously going to be growing pains because of added complexity. Just in my own life, I know there's growing pains. I can feel that in the added complexity of my own life. It's not as simple as it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, right? But eventually I'll evolve capacities to deal with those complexities, provided the system is stable enough too. And for me, that stable system is my health. And when I think about one of the things that influences my health, there's both the interior and the exterior, right? And we talked about already, but we can also think of, from a healthcare practitioner, I think of the health as an interior and an exterior of the individual, right? And then as a permaculturist, I think of the interior, exterior as a collective. Like, what's our collective interior? What's the culture we're in? What's our relationships like? What's the health of our community as a whole? What are the conversations happening there on the interior? Those aren't things we can measure, but they can be things that are just as unhealthy as anything else. And then we can think of the collective exterior, and then we're really talking about ecology and systems and businesses and collective cultural agreements, things that are written down. And so I think, you know, if we look at health in the biggest lens, it's all four of these pieces. It's our individual interior and exterior, and it's our collective interior and exterior. And you can't really have health without all four.
Mm-hmm. But I think as well too, Marco, like, you know, it's all fine and good to say that, but I think the average person still needs to take time to check in.
Yeah.
And maybe even to look at their own life and say, okay, really, am I balanced enough? Where could I better things? Where could I, and then as well to take a look at the collective, you know, your community, you know, how are things amongst the community, and what am I doing in my life to negatively impact and positively impact those, you know, others around me. You take a look at COVID right now, and, you know, we have a responsibility to the people down the street that we don't know, to keep them safe. And so we all need to do specific things. So, but, you know, COVID is an interesting discussion amongst this discussion as well, too, I think, because I think that everyone around me, at least in up here in Canada, and I'm assuming you guys as well, too, everyone around is kind of checking in. And we're doing things very differently now. People are working from home. They're eating differently. They're not going out to restaurants because restaurants aren't open, at least up in Canada. And so, you know, what it does is it makes everybody kind of check in and in their own lives, both internally and externally, and upon their communities. And I see that there's a significant shift in the way that people are not only doing things, but viewing things. Do you think that this is a really interesting kind of watershed moment for somebody like you that definitely has a story to tell, and maybe some guidance along the way for guys like me and Joe?
I think it has the potential. Like, you can think of any health crisis as a potential turning point. Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of people, it is that potential turning point. You might be like, oh, spending more time with my wife and kids is really good for us. Or it might be like, spending more time with my wife is really difficult. Like, my relationship needs some work, or needs some transition, or needs some shift. Or eating at home, I'm healthier and I'm losing weight, and exercising regularly, I feel so much better. I imagine a lot of parents of young kids are really appreciating how much a role teachers play in their lives. Mm-hmm. You know, like, what's it like being with your own kids all day long?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And children being at school amongst their friends and their social network, that's so important. But yeah, sorry, keep going, yep. Marco.
One piece that really comes to mind around the COVID piece that I think does that we've done a really big disservice to, especially people who are aware of the power of plant medicine, is that so much, so much of the conversation has been around non-pharmaceutical intervention, masks, social distancing, avoiding gatherings. And so little has been about what things build your immunity,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
let's spend a second on that. Talk a little bit about what can someone do to help build their immunity? What are some of the elements?
Well, I think, just like we said before, like, you have all four of those quadrants. You have the interior and the exterior. I think on the exterior level, regular exercise, good sleep, good nutrition are like really huge cornerstones, right? On the interior side, it's, having some sort of practice that helps you connect with something bigger than yourself, and having some knowledge of where your emotions are, having tools to express yourself, and tools to be with yourself, right? And then collectively on the interior is like, what are my relationships like? There's a huge amount of evidence and data that says really one of the longest influencer on longevity and health is the quality of your relationships, particularly for men in marriage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then collectively, what's the ecology environment I'm in, and is the work I'm doing in alignment with what feeds, both feeds my family physically on the external and on the internal level. In terms of like plants, I think, immune modulating plants like elderberry is huge. I think in Chinese medicine and all throughout Asia, one of the things that gets missed a lot is how much herbal medicine is consumed over there. You could say like your average person in Asia might not even be a big believer in Chinese medicine, but they probably have some Chinese medicine in the cabinet. Their mother or grandmother probably gives them Chinese medicine if they're ill. Almost like people might have Tylenol in their cabinet here.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing a lot less mortality and spread of illness from this in Asia, because I think a lot of it is being treated by herbal medicine. The classic formula and the Chinese formulary that's been used for hundreds and hundreds of years for boosting the immunity during epidemics is called Yuping Fengsan, or jade windscreen. And it's a combination of 3 herbs, astragalus being the main one. And it basically boosts the exterior immunity so that we don't get external pathogens in as easily. The classic medicine sort of describes it like closing the gates of the castle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's easy
Absolutely.
so that the marauders can't get in, huh?
That's right.
Which is what and it's so sort of contiguous with the entire idea of what a mask is doing, right? I mean, that's keeping the marauders out. And if you can do that without a mask, because our systems are strong enough, we can then, I think in that sort of world where we live so isolated and don't build a system as we go along, and weakness because of what we put in our body, it's hard then to resist against the pathogens. And in this instance, we can do and make decisions that make a difference in our lives if we choose to do so. Do you feel like there's more and more availability since you started practicing herbal medicine in the past 20 years now?
That there's more awareness around herbal medicine?
Awareness or both awareness and availability.
Yeah, I would say among particularly affluent liberal communities, I would say a lot of them take herbal medicines. I think they're probably a little farther ahead of the curve. It's interesting, some of the most poor people take herbal medicine because they can't afford, Western healthcare, and then some of the various wealthiest and most educated people take herbal medicine because they prefer not to have pharmaceutical interventions.
Yeah, and so those who aren't taking it, where do they get stuck? Where do you find that they're stuck in their minds thinking, oh, that's a bunch of quack? Where do they get stuck?
Well, I think there was a lot of science, medical quackery, in human history. So people are selling things that didn't work or were even harmful, to make money, and there was very little regulation around it. And so you have regulatory agencies that really sort of change the face of medicine to a more narrow allopathic medicine, which is really good if you have a gunshot wound or break your leg, but really bad if you're a type 2 diabetic.
Yeah.
Or are overweight or depressed. Sometimes there's just different tools and different toolboxes. So I think some people who are, if we go back to that interior exterior split, some people who are very much more on what can I measure, You know,
Mhm.
what is proven in a double-blind study? Um, there's very little financial incentive to say, um, do but do pharmaceutical research on a dandelion.
Mhm. Mhm.
The incentive is not there. The financial incentive is not there.
Mhm.
There's a lot of financial incentives to, patent a very narrow uh, use drug that treats a particular illness very well.
That's interesting.
And
Mhm.
So when you're when you're not working, excuse me, you're out doing stuff, backcountry skiing, mountain biking, getting closer to nature.
yeah, I mean, I love being outside. I love
Hmm.
being on bikes. I love being on skis. I love being in the water. Uh, I love just adventuring into places out into the wilderness. I find it really just a place of rejuvenation. And for me, it's my church, going
Hmm.
outdoors.
That's fun. And so you're right now out in Western Colorado?
Yeah, up in Steamboat Springs.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, that's a beautiful part of the world.
Yeah, it's a special community.
You
It's
can't complain there.
a lot of many world class athletes.
Yes.
Hmm.
How's the ski
Absolutely.
season this year?
Ski season is interesting, but I would say not not a great ski season. Like
Mm.
the snow has been late coming and not a lot of it. But
Mm.
I'm still finding great places to ski, so I'm still I s- was still skiing powder today, even though it uh, hasn't snowed in probably 10 days. So
Wow.
sometimes you just have to go further out to find it.
Hmm. A bit more of an uphill climb, huh?
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's
So
it.
Marco, you're a very forward-facing man. I mean, I think that the conversation we're having today, might be a unique conversation, but I don't think it's going to be unique in another 10 or 20 years. I think that this is exactly where we're all headed, which is really quite a lovely place. For kind of this, our next question is, it's really what are you doing to chase tomorrow? Like what's next for you, Marco?
Mm, what's next for me? You know, I think of it's probably more teaching.
Mm,
And particularly teaching the teachers.
Mhm.
Uh, I taught a permaculture teacher training course this year, and had all these amazing young teachers uh, going out into the world. And so I think it's a lot more mentoring for me.
mm,
I think I'll always practice medicine because I love it. I think I'll backcountry ski until I can no longer do it, which I hope is in, one of my ski partners and is just turning the bend on 70, and he's still a strong skier. So I'm I'm sort of gauging by him of how long
there's
I can
hope.
go.
Yeah.
Exactly. We like that.
And I think eventually it's more just sort of aligning my life and my practice. It's more at this point in my life, it's more like fine tuning than any like big shifts. You know,
Mhm.
it's going deeper into my meditation practice, going deeper into my internal martial arts practice. Uh, spend continuing to do the things I love outdoors, continuing to support patients who are going through crisis, continue to support communities going through crisis.
Well, if we had more Marco Lambs, I think we'd have a better world. So, Marco, thanks so much for being on with us. It's my pleasure to get to know you over these past 4 years, and you're an inspiration. And we appreciate you sharing all your knowledge and your thoughts tonight. Thanks for being on.
Oh, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks a lot, Marco.
Take care.
Yeah, be in good health, and hope you guys get some time outside running around. I know you love it.
Mhm.
Definitely.